Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm reacting to Is Meditation Itself the Key to Enlightenment? One Guru Struggle. So this is the one I could find for Raja, that is meditation. Let's go ahead and get started. Well, with the question in hand here, I'd say you can get through. I believe, as far as my understanding is, you can obtain enlightenment from purely karma, purely jnana, purely bhakti, and purely raja. That's as far as I know, is that you can just purely each of those individual ones, but typically we always do a little bit of everything.
What exactly is the role of meditation in spiritual life? How does meditation help you get enlightened? These questions have been debated for a long time by practitioners of Advaita Vedanta and by many others. Here's a story about my own guru, Swami Dayananda, that shows how the role and purpose of meditation is often misunderstood. In his 20s, the future Swami Dayananda was already so dedicated to Advaita Vedanta that he gave up his job to focus his entire life on it. He spent countless hours engaged in deep study of Vedantic texts and in important practices like breathing exercises, fasting, and meditation. But after nearly a decade of single-minded effort, his pursuit suddenly came to a complete stop, and his life was plunged into a state of crisis. What happened? Well, he had been told that his efforts would eventually lead to a profound experience during meditation. In particular, he expected to reach samadhi, a state of absorption in which he would directly experience the limitless supreme bliss of Atma, the true self, and become enlightened. But in spite of years of intense study and practice, that experience never came, and he failed to get enlightened. His failure led him to question the validity of everything he had learned so far. He was taught that to become enlightened, the conceptual knowledge he gained through Vedantic study had to be converted into direct personal realization, and that conversion takes place through the practice of meditation.
To me, it seems like he's trying to obtain enlightenment through jnana, knowledge, as opposed to raja, meditation. He's trying so hard that I think trying too hard in terms of meditation is not my opinion, not the proper way to do it. But perhaps in jnana, knowledge, trying hard to understand that you are not this body, you're not any of these objects or anything like that. I think is jnana the way to try where it actually works. Kind of like, I guess, karma, bhakti. Actually, all of them, I think you do have to try to intentionally not to think of bad things or do bad things, karma. You have to devote yourself, your love to God, bhakti, and knowledge. You have to learn that you're not the body and all that. All those must be active. Whereas Raja, by being active, you're kind of interfering with experiencing nothingness in a sense, because you're constantly saying, I need to quiet down, I need to stop, I need to not think, not feel, and not do. By doing that, you're already doing something. So you kind of have to quiet everything to the point of nothing.
In the white heat of meditation, he was told, realization of Atma finally takes place. He would later learn that those particular instructions were not at all consistent with the teachings found in traditional texts like those written by Shankara, who clearly explained the Upanishads and other Vedantic scriptures about 1,200 years ago. Contrary to those traditional texts, my guru was taught that gaining enlightenment is a matter of theory and practice. Vedanta provides a theoretical basis for the practice of meditation, and deep meditation leads to the state of samadhi, in which Atma is experienced as supreme bliss. After a while, he began to wonder if Atma, the true self, is to be experienced in meditation, then who is it that experiences Atma? Who experiences that supreme bliss? Who is the experiencer? He reasoned that anything you experience is separate and different from you, the experiencer. Like right now, while watching this video, you're different from everything you see on the screen. In the same way, while meditating, you're different from everything you experience in your mind. In fact, a metaphor sometimes used in Vedanta says, all your experiences are projected on the screen of your mind, so to speak, and you are the conscious observer of everything projected there. So, if you are the conscious observer of all the experiences that arise in your mind, then how can Atma, which is your true nature, be something you experience in meditation?
Even, and that's what I was kind of thinking too, even the blankness that you experience is an experience itself, is it not?
Atma isn't an object you can observe in your mind like other things. Based on this reasoning, my guru came to understand that certain parts of what he had been taught were somehow defective. Yet he couldn't dismiss the non-dual wisdom of the ancient rishis, the teachings on which the tradition of Advaita Vedanta is based. So he concluded that Vedanta itself was not defective, but instead something was missing. Some kind of key that could unlock the wisdom of the rishis and lead him to enlightenment. He spent many sleepless nights trying to discover that key, but after a long, frustrating search, he finally gave up. He surprised his friends by giving away all his books on Vedanta. His pursuit then took a very different direction. He began to study the works of great mystics like William Blake, Peter Ouspensky, and Lao Tzu. He also immersed himself in the teachings of Jiddu Krishnamurti and Brahmana Maharshi. Then he happened to attend some classes given by a relatively unknown teacher in Andhra Pradesh named Swami Pranavananda. In those classes, he heard the very same Vedantic teachings he had heard so many times before, but there was a crucial difference. Swami Pranavananda criticized the presentation of Advaita Vedanta as a theoretical basis for the practice of meditation. He stressed the importance of a crucial but often unrecognized principle by saying that Vedanta is a pramana, an instrument of knowledge, an independent and self-sufficient means for gaining direct personal realization of the true self, Atma. This shift of orientation was the key that my guru needed to unlock the wisdom of the rishis and bring his agonizing struggle to an end.
And Interestingly enough, actually, this is the reason why I watch many different gurus and swamis, is because each of them teaches a little bit different. So far, they're all very, I would say similar, but all point in the same direction. Paths slightly different, teaching slightly different, and sometimes different topics taught differently. I understand each one differently. Sometimes I don't understand Suguru in a topic, or maybe I do, but yet someone else explains it a lot better, or whatever the case may be. This is the reason I hope many people out there watch many different gurus, because I think it can only help, hopefully help learn the knowledge, learn what it is, better understand the teachings of it, of the subject matter.
What exactly is a pramana? A pramana is a source of valid knowledge. It's an instrument you use to gain knowledge of something. For example, your 5 senses, sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch, together form a pramana called sense perception. Sense perception is the instrument you use to gain knowledge of colors, shapes, sounds, smells, and so on. Another pramana you use is inference. When you see smoke rising from a mountainside, you infer the presence of fire there. So even though you can't see the flames directly, inference gives you knowledge of the fire, because you know wherever there's smoke, there's fire. In addition to sense perception and inference, there's a third pramana you use every day. When you read a book or browse the internet, you're using a pramana called verbal testimony. Verbal testimony is a philosophical term for a pramana in the form of words. Specifically, the words of authoritative sources. Those sources include knowledgeable teachers, factual books, scholarly articles, and sometimes educational videos like this one. Obviously, the validity of knowledge produced by verbal testimony depends entirely on how accurate the source happens to be. It's really unfortunate that we're inundated nowadays by so much misinformation in mass media, on the internet, and elsewhere. As a result, it's become quite difficult to judge the authenticity of everything we read and hear. So, we have to be extremely careful when using verbal testimony. Advaita Vedanta is so cautious that any verbal testimony, regardless of its source, is flatly rejected if it contradicts knowledge you've gained from other pramanas, like sense perception and inference. Shankara himself boldly declared that he would even reject sacred Vedic scriptures if they said that fire is cold. This topic about pramanas is vast. In Western philosophy, it forms an entire field of study called epistemology. Our discussion here barely scratches the surface, but it's enough for the matter at hand. Before we continue, it's important to note that simple experience is not accepted as a pramana, like sense perception, inference, and verbal testimony. All major schools of philosophy, both in India and in the West, reject mere experience as an instrument of valid knowledge. Why? Because experience only provides raw data, so to speak. It doesn't produce conclusive knowledge. Let me explain.
I'm wondering, real quick before it moves on, is perhaps what he's talking about is what I believe to be subjective, at least basically how I perceive things, what I see, what I taste, what I smell, what I feel, and whatever the other senses. But yes, any kind of experience that I have is subjective because it's how I experience it. And perhaps someone else doesn't experience this, will not experience that exact same thing the same way as I do.
In the evening, when you watch the sunset, the pramana of sense perception produces knowledge of the sun in the sky. But your experience of watching the sun go down doesn't produce any additional knowledge. That experience doesn't make you understand how the Earth rotates on its axis, or how the horizon is actually moving upwards towards the sun. Experience only produces raw data, and that data has to be correctly interpreted. But the problem is, we all interpret our experiences differently. One person might think the sun travels downwards, but another, trained in astrophysics, would think the horizon moves upwards. In the same way, anything you experience in meditation is also subject to interpretation. If you experience limitless supreme bliss, you're likely to interpret your experience based on your personal orientation and background. For example, a Buddhist meditator might think supreme bliss is a manifestation of the inherently luminous nature of the mind. A Christian meditator might think it's a state of ecstatic mystical union with Almighty God. A neuroscientist might think it's the effect of the chemical dopamine circulating in the brain and affecting its neurons. Since experience is subject to various interpretations, it can't be accepted as an independent instrument of knowledge. On the other hand, experiences can certainly help you gain knowledge when they're interpreted correctly. That is, when they're interpreted according to valid knowledge you've already gained from sense perception, inference, and verbal testimony. For instance, suppose you watch the sunset along with someone trained in astrophysics. When he explains how the sun's apparent motion is an optical illusion caused by the rotation of the Earth, his verbal testimony will give you knowledge. The same is true for your experiences in meditation. If you experience limitless supreme bliss, that experience itself won't produce knowledge of Atma, because it's just raw data. But if you interpret that experience with the help of Vedantic teachings, you can actually discover your true divine nature, Atma.
Actually, I was kind of thinking that at the very beginning is the fact that, you can understand a lot of things. You can understand Advaita Vedanta to the T, to the book, to the whatever, but that doesn't mean that you'd experience Atman or extreme bliss or Samadhi. It's knowing something and experiencing something are definitely two different things. But obviously, you kind of have to know something to be able to understand whether you're experiencing it or not. I mean, you can claim to experience something, but if you don't know what that is, I guess perhaps you don't know what to do, perhaps. But maybe if it's something pleasurable, of course you can say like, well, I'll continue that, and you could realize that, oh, you're experiencing bliss. I think that's not what he's trying to say here, actually. And I guess, like I said, what I'm trying to do is first get an understanding and the knowledge of Advaita Vedanta methods and all that, and then the practice. A lot of people have been saying I need to do the experiencing of it, the meditation, and a lot of the inner engineering and stuff. Yes, but There's a couple things in my life that I have to get straightened out first before I start that. Otherwise, it's just a big waste of time. And I'm trying to get all that straightened out as soon as possible, but it might be not until the end of the year.
How? When Swami Pranavananda said that Advaita Vedanta is a pramana, not a theory, he was referring to Vedanta as a form of verbal testimony. According to Shankara and other traditional teachers, Advaita Vedanta is an instrument of knowledge that's capable of producing knowledge of Atma, leading you to discover your true inner self. But here we have to ask, how can verbal testimony, mere words, lead you to personally discover or realize Atma? To answer this important question, we first have to understand a crucial distinction between two kinds of knowledge, direct knowledge and indirect knowledge. Sense perception produces direct knowledge because of the direct contact between your senses and the objects you perceive. Inference, on the other hand, can only produce indirect knowledge. Your knowledge of fire on the mountain is indirect because you can't see the fire directly. But what about knowledge produced by verbal testimony? Is it direct or indirect?
Indirect.
Well, that's a bit more complicated. Verbal testimony generally produces indirect knowledge, but there's an important exception that we'll see later. Here's a helpful example. On a visit to India long ago, I saw a beautiful waterfall at the foot of a little town named Gangotri, about 10,000 feet up in the Himalayas. Over that waterfall flows the Bhagirathi River, the uppermost tributary of the Ganges. Just now, my verbal testimony gave you indirect knowledge of that waterfall. Indirect because you haven't seen the waterfall yourself. To get direct knowledge, you have to go to Gangotri. So, if the verbal testimony of Vedanta can give you only indirect knowledge of Atma, then where should you go to get direct knowledge? Atma is already present here and now as your own true nature. So going to a sacred temple or a cave in the Himalayas isn't going to help. More than that, to get direct knowledge of the waterfall, you have to see it with your own eyes. But Atma can't be seen, heard, tasted, smelled, or touched. So, how can you personally discover or realize your true nature?
This is the interesting question. Can you experience yourself? Can yourself be experienced? Can the subject be the object? I guess, perhaps, like that. That's the question. Can the subject be the object? So far, I know some comments. Oh God, I need to remember to answer comments, or answer certain statements, because they're really good comments. I've been reading them. They're really good, and I wanna answer them. But one of them was, can the subject be the object? Well, if the subject cannot be an object, then we can never experience Atma. Because if it's something that we experience, therefore it must be an object, right? So, experience blankness is merely an experience itself. It's just to experience nothing. But it's still an experience. I don't know if I've said this before. Probably not. Maybe a while back, but I'm not sure. I'll just say this is the first time I've said that, and there's something very interesting. Again, it goes back to someone that made a comment saying, can the subject be the object? And if the subject cannot be the object, then we can never ever experience the subject. That's logical, right? Let me know. Hopefully you might answer it, actually.
The ancient rishis discovered that Atma, your true nature, is Sat Chit Ananda, usually translated as existence, consciousness, and bliss. In this expression, the word chit refers to your own awareness or consciousness, the consciousness by which you're aware of everything you experience, aware of what's happening all around you, and aware of what's happening in your mind, aware of your thoughts and emotions. Consciousness is fundamental to your nature because, in essence, you are an existent conscious being. That is, you are Sat Chit. We'll come to Ananda shortly.
Makes sense. You have to exist to be conscious of something. You can exist and not be conscious. Those are rocks, objects, basically. Animals. They exist. They have consciousness, but limited, perhaps. I think that's the idea, I believe, right? Let me know again. They are not completely aware, but they are probably survival aware, as in they understand that they have to stay alive and eat. That kind of awareness, as opposed to us, where we are a bit more aware, self-aware. A great example would be if you go to YouTube and look up videos where they have a mirror in the jungle, and then you see many animals interacting with it. Very few animals are self-aware, as in when they look in the mirror, they realize that they're seeing themselves in the reflection. Most animals will think it's another animal out there.
Since Atma is your own consciousness, that means Atma is actually present in your experience this very moment, present as awareness itself, as your awareness of whatever is happening right now. So you can't really say that Atma is completely unknown to you. You know that you're a conscious being, but you don't know the true nature of that consciousness. The ancient rishis discovered that consciousness, your consciousness, is unborn, uncreated, unchanging. Your consciousness is limitless, infinite, and utterly untouched by worldly suffering. Your consciousness is the divinity within you. All this is indicated by the word Ananda that we skipped over before. So, even though you know that you're conscious, the limitless divine nature of your consciousness can remain unknown, completely hidden from you. For knowledge of your true nature, you need a pramana, an instrument of knowledge. According to traditional teachers, Advaita Vedanta, when properly taught, is that pramana. It can lead you to personally realize or discover your true nature. But there seems to be a huge problem here. If verbal testimony usually produces indirect knowledge, how can the teachings of Vedanta lead to personal realization, direct knowledge of Atma? Well, here's the exception I mentioned before. For something remote, like the waterfall in Gangotri, verbal testimony can only produce indirect knowledge. But for something that's not remote, verbal testimony can indeed produce direct knowledge. How? There's a great example in the famous epic Mahabharata that tells an amazing story about the mighty warrior Karna. Shortly after he was born, Karna was abandoned by his mother, Queen Kunti. He was raised by adoptive parents, and he never knew that he was really a prince. Decades later, Karna met Queen Kunti, who told him that she was his mother, and he was a prince. He gained this knowledge through Kunti's words, through her verbal testimony. But the knowledge he gained wasn't indirect, like knowledge of the waterfall in Gangotri. Kunti's words actually produced direct knowledge, leading Karna to personally discover his own royal status. Here, verbal testimony could produce direct knowledge because it was knowledge of something immediately present, Karna himself, not something remote like the waterfall. Certainly, Atma isn't remote. It's present here and now as your own true nature. So, just as Kunti's words enabled Karna to realize that he was a prince, so too the words of Vedanta can enable you to realize your true nature as Satchidananda, as eternal, limitless consciousness. In this way, Vedanta itself can lead you to personally discover or realize Atma. Also, consider the fact that Karna was already a prince. Kunti's words didn't need to transform him in any way. They only enabled him to discover his true royal status. In the same way, your true nature is already Sat Chit Ananda. So you don't need to be transformed in any way. You only need to realize Atma, your true nature. One last point here. Did Karna need to meditate on Kunti's words to realize that he was a prince? Not at all. Simply understanding her words was enough.
I see what it's trying to say, but it's still a little difficult for me to grasp, just because to say something is royalty or not royalty is merely words we make up. You know, who is royal and who isn't. And I see how he's saying how his royalty is something that is not tangible, much like Atman is not tangible. But there's a way to prove the royalty is by being born from royalty. And if your royalty mother and father can say that yes, you are our child, then it's already imposed because you have proof of it. But nothing... Books may say that you have Atma, but I don't know. I'm trying to... I see the one-to-one relation, but it's a little different still. Let's see if it says anything.
The same is true for realizing your true nature. When Vedanta's teachings lead you to realize that your consciousness is eternal, limitless, and divine, then nothing more is required. Simply put, if the problem is not knowing the true nature of your own consciousness, then the solution is knowledge. Knowledge produced by a pramana, by the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. As we discussed before, the experiences you have in meditation can't produce knowledge on their own. But that certainly doesn't mean the practice of meditation is unnecessary. Why? You will never gain knowledge of Atma unless your mind is fully prepared and capable of making that discovery. To prepare your mind, certain spiritual practices are indispensable, including the practice of meditation. So, even though meditation alone can't make you enlightened, if you don't meditate, enlightenment will remain beyond your grasp.
Here we go. I was thinking this. I had a question in my mind, but I'd say I'd wait. And let's see what he says.
From Swami Pranavananda, my guru learned that Vedanta is a pramana, an instrument of knowledge for discovering the true divine nature of consciousness. That fact turned out to be the key he needed to overcome his struggle and personally realize Atma. This key is found in many Sanskrit texts and commentaries of Shankara and later teachers of Advaita Vedanta. Then, why wasn't my guru told this in the first place? Why isn't this so-called key to realization more widely known and taught? Well, until fairly recently, the texts and commentaries containing this key have been taught mainly in secluded ashrams and other monastic institutions in India, where teachers and students are mostly sannyasis and brahmacharis, Hindu monks and celibate students. Orthodox teachers in those institutions used to think that Advaita Vedanta should never be taught in public. Why? According to them, only highly disciplined monks are capable of acquiring the full measure of mental preparation necessary for enlightenment. Their assumption is certainly debatable, but its result was to prevent Advaita Vedanta from being taught in public venues. In this way, the key to realization remained hidden away. But in the past 100 years or so, the teachings of Advaita Vedanta have begun to find their way out of secluded ashrams and into the mainstream of public life. Several important spiritual figures ignored the highly restrictive views of Orthodox teachers and chose to bring the wisdom of Vedanta to the masses. They began to teach in cities and towns throughout India and later around the world. In this way, the traditional manner in which Vedanta had been taught underwent a huge change. That transformation was crucial. Without it, so many sincere aspirants, including me, would have had no access at all to this body of sacred wisdom. Unfortunately, the transformation that brought Vedanta to the public also brought an unintended consequence. Here's the problem. For centuries, Advaita Vedanta had been taught from the original Sanskrit texts. To make those teachings accessible to the general public, they had to be translated into English and other languages. But when the original texts were replaced by translations, a tremendous wealth of traditional scholarship got lost in the process. Further, among later generations of teachers, many didn't know Sanskrit well enough to read the original texts.
I would have thought it would be like the internet, where you have one information as people read it, and I guess as people read it and they continue to spread that word, it gets translated and translated and translated, eventually to how each people translated it is they put their own interpretation to it, so it ends up being something else different from what the original text was. Or maybe some people, or maybe whenever they read it and they interpret it differently from the original translation, and then it gets even worse as it continues down the line of translation, that the translation from translation just ends up nothing like the original works anymore.
They had to rely on translations instead. But as we all know, translations vary widely in their accuracy. They also lack the clarity and precision of thought found in the originals. As a result of all this, the so-called key to realization The recognition that Advaita Vedanta is a pramana seemed to get lost. It disappeared entirely from public lectures and from books written in English. Yet, it never disappeared from traditional ashrams, like that of Swami Pranavananda, where the original Sanskrit texts and commentaries continued to be taught. Unfortunately, the popularized version of Vedanta taught in public was no longer tethered to those original texts. As a result, it underwent several alterations. A number of concepts that were completely foreign to the original teachings were somehow adopted. For example, instead of teaching that Atma is the consciousness already present in your experience, the popularized version of Vedanta taught that Atma has to be experienced in meditation as limitless supreme bliss.
That is in fact what I hear. And the question that I had, that I will wait until the end probably to say, experience. The popular version of Vedanta taught that Atman has to be experienced
In meditation as limitless supreme bliss.
And I was going to say I also contradicted myself from what I've said in previous videos to what I'm saying now, and I'm going to make that statement if I don't forget at somewhere around the end of the video.
Instead of considering Vedanta to be a pramana that can produce direct knowledge of Atma, the popularized version of Vedanta presented itself as the theoretical basis for the practice of meditation. In the 1950s, my guru was taught this popularized version of Advaita Vedanta. Even though most of its teachings were consistent with the original texts, the so-called key to realization had been lost, leading to his long and difficult struggle. After receiving that key from Swami Pranavananda, my guru reread all the scriptures and texts he had studied before. But now he was able to understand them properly and used them as a pramana.
And this is my journey with this as well, where when I first started, I had understandings of it. A lot of people saying, "Oh, you're throwing in your own interpretation of things." Yes. The thing that you have to understand about me is that I have many interpretations of many different things. The only way I have to try to understand it for what it is, how I interpret it, what it potentially could mean, which is probably many different ways. But I have all those in my mind. None of it is lost. It's just I don't know which one's the right one because I only have one video to go off of. So he says it this way. Okay, I don't quite understand that. It could mean this, it could mean this, it could mean this, or it could mean this. Until I get more information, any one of those are possibly true. And as I get more and more information, a lot of these things, oh, this one's definitely not it. This one, no. This one, no. So it's one of these two. It gets more refined the more knowledge I gain. So whenever I'm throwing in my own interpretation out there, it's also I'm throwing out there what I think it might mean, what it potentially could be. And also people have made comments and I won't say corrected, but helped me understand a lot of the things that I didn't understand in videos and helped me refine my understanding of it. So as I knock out other understandings of it, I come closer to the true understanding, but there could still be like 3 other understandings of it. And the only way to have one true understanding of it is by gaining more and more knowledge. So whenever I make comments, it's also potentially other understandings that I have of it, perhaps, but not the only one. And also, again, it's usually because I have limited knowledge on it that I have many different understandings of it. I don't know if people are used to that. My mind tends to have, when you say one thing, it has 50 different meanings to it for me until I learn more about the subject matter or who's talking or what the definition is. It brings down those 50 to 45. The more I know, 40. The more I know, 35. The more I know, to 5 different understandings. And then whenever I know a lot more about you, it becomes maybe 3. The reason why 3 is because just because I know you doesn't mean I know exactly which path you have, because any of those paths are very, very valid. I said a lot.
Previously, he had studied Vedanta the same way you might study organic chemistry or world history. To study academic subjects like these, you have to learn all the main concepts and acquire a lot of important information. But Vedanta is completely different. To study Vedanta like an academic subject is like studying all the parts and features of a microscope. A microscope is a powerful instrument. It's a scientific tool that's meant to be used for research. To gain knowledge, you have to use the microscope. You have to look through the lens, not study all its parts and features.
But I don't mean to. I don't know how to say it, but the one thing I'll say, if you don't know how to use the microscope, you're going to have to study the parts and features, because microscopes have many different. I'm being very technical here, but this is how I work, is that in order for me to use a tool, I must know how it's meant to be used. I need to know what magnification, to use the microscope, I need to know that I can turn, like if you look through a microscope and you put something there, it's going to be blurry as crap, because you need to, I think what they do is they have to first bring it all the way down, and then you slide, and then you bring it up a little bit, and then you slide it in there. And then you look, and then you bring it up until it gets into focus. So you have to know that about the microscope. You need to know how to use the microscope, all the parts and all the features. Otherwise, you will be misusing the microscope. Hopefully he corrects me in this next few minutes here.
Similarly, Vedanta is a powerful instrument that's meant to be used. It's not meant to be studied like an academic subject. You have to look through the lens of Vedanta, so to speak, to discover what the ancient rishis discovered. You have to use its teachings properly as a pramana. All too often, Advaita Vedanta is taught and studied the same way as academic subjects, where the goal is to understand concepts and acquire information. But this approach strips it of its intended purpose. Swami Dayananda learned how to use Vedanta as a pramana. And over a span of 50 years, he taught many thousands of people all over the world. Students who attended one of his 3-year-long residential courses also learned to use Vedanta as a pramana. In this way, Swami Dayananda passed on to future generations of teachers the once lost key to realization.
Okay, so let me go ahead and say what I need to say before I forget. So yes, I completely agree. I always thought Advaita Vedanta as, in a sense, a tool, meaning that you have to learn how it works so that you can use it properly to achieve samadhi, atman, awareness, realization. You cannot use something that you don't know anything about. So that's my process. And this is why I kind of go through this. And a lot of people saying, get into inner engineering, start meditating, starting all this. I want to know how to use the tool. I want to make sure, this is how I work, generally speaking, too. Like with my computers and building, I want to make sure I know everything before I make purchases and build it. Otherwise, I'm screwed. So this is just how I am. I want to learn how to use the tool as close to 100% as possible, and then start using it. I think I want to say I'm nearly close there, but I think I have to jump on board to the experiential part of it, but it's not the right time just yet. I think it's gonna have to come at towards the maybe next year. It's gonna be next year, but like I mean the beginning of the year, just because of things going on in my life right now. Nothing bad. Just it's too much distractions at the moment. I'm hoping to get it straightened out. And the contradiction part. I said in other videos that everything must manifest in your consciousness for you to experience it. And the contradiction is the fact that if you are the consciousness, which is the subject cannot experience the subject because the subject is the subject. So in order for you to experience something, it must be an object, something separate from the subject. So things don't manifest in your consciousness. So it goes, I guess, along the lines of if everything is Brahman, how can Brahman experience Brahman? How does the subject become the object? So this is a contradiction in my logic now, or the logic that I've had. So how can the subject be the object? If everything's one and the same, if everything is Brahman. I don't know, I think I've asked this question before, I'm not sure. No, I haven't, because I don't think I have anyway. But yeah, how does the subject experience the subject? How does the subject experience the subject as an object? Do you understand my question, I hope? And also I want to go back and look at the definition of that real quick. I thought I remembered it, but
Yes.
nope, not that one. Direct knowledge, yes. Instrument of knowledge. Yeah, I thought it was jnana. I figured so. He was trying very hard in what seems to be jnana yoga, the realization of one's true self through knowing that you're not these objects, you're not yourself, you're not this body or mind. Interesting that he still went through jnana and then a meditation. And I've always thought, like most things in life, most things that you obtain, all knowledge, perhaps all knowledge are tools that you use. It is not meant to just, how do I say, just because you've obtained it doesn't mean it works automatically. You have to use it. It's not automatic. There's no knowledge that's automatic, perhaps. I'll say that for now. I don't know if there is one, but so far now there's no knowledge that's automatic. All knowledge must be used actively. Anyways, interesting, I will say very interesting video on this one. So anyways, that's my reaction to this meditation itself, the key to enlightenment, one guru struggle. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, thumbs down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.